Every standard form categorical statement has a quantifier, and that quantifier is defined by the words all, no, or some. Each statement has a subject term, and that is basically the category of things that the statement is about. Each statement has a predicate term, which is basically the category of things that is said of the subject term. Each statement has a copula, which is defined by the word are or are not. This is the word that basically brings the predicate term and the subject term together in a categorical statement. Both subjects and predicate terms are plural nouns because they are about a category of things. And each term has a corresponding term complement. And I also mentioned in the last lesson that the fact that each term in a categorical statement has a term complement is an aspect of those terms. It's not necessarily the case that the term complements are components to categorical statements. However, they can be, and this is why it's really important for you to understand that terms have term complements. Because as we continue on with this lesson, you'll see how it's important to get rid of term complements or replace term complements with terms in the process of translating. Okay, now we've also discussed how there are several types of standard form categorical statement. There's a type A, and the structure or pattern of a type A is all SRP. An example of a statement that has this pattern is all cats are mammals. There's also the type E. The pattern of this type of statement is no SRP. An example of this is no cats are mammals. There is also type I, some SRP. An example of this is some cats are mammals. And finally, we have the type O, which is structured some S are not P. And an example of this is some cats are not mammals. Now notice that there are only 4 standard form categorical statements, and these are the only 4. So anytime you actually translate an ordinary language categorical statement into a standard form categorical statement, you must translate them into one of these 4 forms. Furthermore, in translating them to one of these 4 forms, you have to make sure that you are faithful to the intent of the author, meaning you want to capture exactly what the author is saying in the ordinary language statement when you translate it into a standard form categorical statement. Furthermore, notice how there is no statement here that is standard form that follows the structure all S are not P. The only standard form categorical statement here that has the copula are not is the O type statement, okay? So don't ever translate any ordinary language statement into all S are not P, because that is not a standard form categorical statement. So one problem that we might run into when we are translating ordinary language statements into standard form categorical statements is when the ordinary language statement is missing a plural noun as one of the terms or as both the terms. Now here we have an example of an ordinary language categorical statement. Some political parties are disorganized, and notice that we are missing a plural noun for the predicate term. And I'm going to go ahead and walk into the frame to kind of further show you what I mean. So here we have political parties, and this is the subject term, okay? And here we have disorganized, and this is the predicate term. Now, it seems like there's everything right about this statement in the sense that it has a quantifier, it has a copula, and there are 2 terms. The only thing wrong is that the predicate term is not a plural noun. So in this case, what we want to do is go ahead and simply change that predicate term into a plural noun without changing the meaning of the statement itself. So we have here some political parties are disorganized groups, okay? Now notice how what we did was we changed disorganized into disorganized groups, which changed that predicate term into a plural noun, okay? Another problem that we might have is when you have non-standard verbs. So here is a statement in ordinary language. Trespassers will be prosecuted. And notice how in this statement here you have will be as the verb. And for a standard form categorical statement, the verb has to be are or are not, okay? and it always has to be are or are not. So we want to translate this statement such that we change the verb to are or are not, okay? And also another problem with this is that you don't have a quantifier, okay? So there's no quantifier here, and here the predicate term is not a plural noun. So you have actually 3 issues with this ordinary language statement. One of them being that it's a non-standard verb. Another one is that you're missing a quantifier. And then third, prosecuted is not a plural noun. So in this case, we want to fix all of those. We want to add the quantifier. We want to change the non-standard verb. And we want to change the predicate term into a plural noun. And we'll have something like this. All trespassers are people who will face prosecution. So now here we've added the quantifier, and we went ahead and changed the non-standard verb into a standard verb, are, and we've changed the predicate term into a plural noun. People who will face prosecution. And we haven't changed the meaning of the statement itself, right? Trespassers will be prosecuted. The meaning of that is basically that all trespassers are people who will face prosecution. Okay? Now, in these statements, when you have a non-standard adverb or a pronoun, okay, whenever there is smoke, there is fire, what you want to do is change that into all places that. If you have the pronoun nowhere, it's talking about no places, so you want to go ahead and change nowhere to no places, okay? And here we have then the statement, all places that have smoke are places that have fire. Notice that this was a conditional statement. Wherever there is smoke, there is fire. And it was changed into a standard form categorical statement, okay? All places that have smoke are places that have fire, okay? And what we did was, wherever basically can be understood as an if, and here as a then. So if there is smoke, then there is fire. In that sense, whatever comes before the if is going to be the antecedent of that conditional statement. And that antecedent will always be the subject term, okay? So notice how we have now places that have smoke as the subject term of our standard form categorical statement. And what comes after the then will be the predicate. So here we have places that have fire. Now this is going to be the case with all conditional statements, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, except for one exception, if the statement uses the phrase only if, okay? Okay, so. Okay. Now, we can also have issues where you have statements which start with the phrase, it is false that. So here we have a statement, it is false that every professional athlete uses steroids. Now, this statement is actually a statement within a statement in essence, okay? So you have the statement, it is false that every professional athlete uses steroids. And this is actually suggesting that the statement, every professional athlete uses the steroid, is false. So we have here a statement within a statement, okay? Now, in the case where the phrase it is false that is being used, okay, what you need to understand is first what it is that is false according to that statement. So what you want to do is identify the statement that's inside the statement itself, okay? So here we have, it is false that all professional athletes are people who use steroids. Now notice how we've isolated the internal statement from the external statement. It is false that all professional athletes are people who use steroids. Then what we did was translate that internal statement into a standard form categorical statement, okay? The internal statement here in the ordinary language statement didn't have a quantifier, so it had every rather than all, no, or some. okay? And it also didn't have a copula, so it has the verb uses, but doesn't have the verb are or are not, okay? Furthermore, the statement also uses steroids as the predicate term, okay? But that is actually not a plural noun. So we want to translate that into a plural noun. So here we have all professional athletes, and this here we have the quantifier, the subject term, are as the copula, and then people who use steroids. This is now a plural noun, okay? Now after doing so, what we want to do is take the contradictory of this statement, okay? Remember when we talked about the modern square of opposition. So if it's false that all professional athletes are people who use steroids, then it's true that some professional athletes are not people who use steroids, okay? So we've simply translated first the ordinary language statement into a statement where we keep the it is false that phrase and made sure that the internal statement, which the statement suggests is false, is in a standard form categorical structure. And then we translated this statement, it is false that all professional athletes are people who use steroids, into what is true according to this statement, and that's the contradictory using the modern square of opposition. Some professional athletes are not people who use steroids, okay? Okay, another issue is when we have an implied quantifier, okay? So a quantifier is not really explicitly stated in that statement, but it's implied, it's suggested. Here are a couple of examples. A professor is a human being, a professor is not a machine, a professor won the Nobel Prize. In all of these, there's a quantifier that is implied. In the first one, you have an A-type statement. All professors are human beings. That's what's being implied by the statement, a professor is a human being, okay? The second one is suggesting that no professors are machines, okay? So when you say a professor is not a machine, what you're saying is no professor is a machine. And then the statement, a professor won the Nobel Prize, because we're talking about probably at least one professor, okay? Some professors are winners of Nobel Prizes. So we went ahead and added the quantifiers here according to the intent or the meaning of the ordinary language statements given, okay? Okay, another thing in terms of quantifiers, you can also have non-standard quantifiers, and we actually talked about this a little bit prior to. So here we have the statement, not every investment banker is a crook, okay? So what this statement is actually suggesting is that there are some investment bankers that are not crooks. So you want to translate the not every into the quantifier that captures this intended meaning, and that would be some investment bankers are not crooks. And notice how this becomes then an O-type statement, okay? You can also have conditional statements, and you would translate this into a standard form categorical statement, and we've talked a little bit about it previously as well. Okay, so if you have a statement like, a dog is not dangerous if it has been well trained, okay, the first thing that you want to do is identify the antecedent of that conditional statement. Why? Because the antecedent will take the place of the subject term, okay? So notice out here, this is where we have the if, and the antecedent will always come after the if in a conditional statement unless the statement uses a phrase only if, okay? That's the one exception to the rule. So because this here, it has been well trained, okay, comes after the if, okay, this will be our subject term, okay? Then a dog being a dangerous animal, okay, will be the predicate term, okay? And notice how also with this we don't have a quantifier and we don't have a standard verb, are or are not, so we're going to have to insert that into the statement while maintaining the meaning of the statement, okay? So in such a case, what we can do is translate the statement into the statement If a dog has been well trained, then it is not dangerous. So here it clarifies the conditional of this statement into a standard conditional if-then. And then to turn it into a standard form categorical statement, we have all well-trained dogs are non-dangerous animals. Okay? So here we have well-trained dogs as the subject term, which is indicated here after the if, okay, and indicated here after the if, okay. Then we have non-dangerous animals, okay, indicated here is not a dangerous animal, okay, and this is a predicate, and indicated here is not a dangerous animal. Okay, this is the subject, and the subject. Okay, we went ahead and added the quantifier all. Change the copula to are, okay? Have the subject term and the predicate term in the correct places, and both the subject and the predicate terms are plural nouns. So when you say a dog is not dangerous if it has been well trained, what you mean is that all well-trained dogs are non-dangerous animals. Okay, here is another example of a conditional statement. If a dog is not obedient, then it has not been well trained, okay? Notice how in this one it's slightly different than the first one that we had, because here you have two negations, one in the antecedent and one in the consequent. So again, the word if, and in the conditional statement what comes after the word if is the antecedent, okay? And the antecedent will always be the subject term of the standard form categorical statement, and what comes after the then is the consequent of the conditional statement, and the consequent will always be the predicate term of the standard form categorical statement, okay? So here we have a conditional statement where there's a negation in both the antecedent and the consequent, okay? Now, in the one that we had before, we had a negation in the consequent alone and not the antecedent, okay? And in this case, what we did was we translated that negation, a dog is not dangerous, okay, into the term complement of what that term might be as a plural noun. So we translated a dog is not dangerous into non-dangerous animals, okay? And we can do the same thing here. We can translate a dog is not obedient into the term complement, which is non-obedient animals, and it has not been well trained into the term complement, non-well trained animals, okay? And then again here we would want to add the quantifier, okay? So notice how there's no quantifier, and we would also have to add the standard verb are or are not, okay? And in this case it will be are, okay? So what we have after translation would be the phrase, all non-obedient dogs are non-well-trained dogs, okay? So here we have non-obedient dogs is the subject term, okay? So non-obedient dogs is the subject term, okay? Given to us by the antecedent of the conditional. And then we have non-well-trained dogs as the predicate term, given to us by the consequent of the conditional, okay? And we have here are as the copula and all as the quantifier. Remember, the purpose of translating is to change these statements into standard form categorical statements that clearly express what these ordinary language statements mean, okay? So we want to make sure to maintain the meaning of the original statement. If a dog is not obedient, then it has not been well trained, basically means all non-obedient dogs are non-well-trained dogs, okay? We can also have a case where we have exclusive propositions. So exclusive propositions are statements that start with only, none but, solely, alone, none, or except, okay? And here's an example here. Only persons with tickets can enter the arena. Now, what we can do is first change the statement into a conditional statement. think about the meaning of this statement itself. Only persons with tickets can enter the arena. As a conditional statement, this can mean if a person does not have a ticket, then that person cannot enter the arena. Okay? Given this, after we translated this into a conditional statement, we can go ahead and translate it into a standard form categorical statement using the methods we would for conditional statements. So here we have all non-persons with tickets are non-persons who can enter the arena. So notice how after we translate it into a conditional statement, okay, if you say only persons with tickets can enter the arena, what you're saying is if you're a person that doesn't have a ticket, then you cannot enter the arena. So here we have, again, the subject term of our categorical statement because this phrase here follows the if. And then here we have the, including here, the predicate term of our categorical statement because it follows the then, okay, in an if-then conditional statement, okay? And we went ahead and these two negations were used to create term complements of them, so non-persons with tickets, and here non-persons who can enter the arena, okay? And so we have the subject term, non-persons with tickets, and the predicate term, non-persons who can enter the arena. And then we added the quantifier all and changed the copula into, changed the verb into a standard form verb, which is the copula are, okay? Now we can also translate this statement, only persons with tickets can enter the arena, into this conditional statement. If a person can enter the arena, then that person has a ticket. So this is basically the positive version of this statement here. Instead of using negations, we have no negations in either the antecedent or the consequent. Now notice in this case, however, what we did was switched. Okay, we switched the subject term and the predicate term. So if you're turning a conditional statement that has negations in both its antecedent and its consequent, when you take those negations off, you actually have to flip the consequent and the antecedent. So now, for the positive version, okay, you have a person can enter the arena, okay, as the antecedent, okay, and you have person has a ticket as the consequent, okay, because we're flipping the antecedent and the consequent from the statement that had the negation in it. So here, if a person does not have a ticket, was our antecedent, okay, and now we have it as our consequent. And then that person cannot enter the arena was our consequent, okay? And now it is our antecedent. So going from a negative statement, conditional statement that has a negation on both sides, on the antecedent position and the consequent position, when we turn it into a positive statement without any negations, we need to flip the antecedent and the consequent, okay? So after we flip the antecedent and the consequent, we can go ahead and translate this like any other conditional statement, okay? So again, the antecedent becomes the subject term, and the consequent becomes the predicate term, okay? For our standard form categorical statement, we have to add the quantifier, and then we also have to add the copula, which in this case will be are, okay? So in doing so, we would have the following statement. All persons who can enter the arena are persons who have tickets. Now notice how here we have persons who can enter the arena as the subject term and persons who have tickets as the predicate term. Then we have are as the copula and all as the quantifier. Okay. Now this is basically what you would do with any conditional statements that don't have negations in it at all, okay? So if you have this given to you, if a person can enter the arena, then that person has a ticket, what you'd want to do is translate this into an A-type statement using the quantifier all, okay? And you would use the copula are, and the antecedent term will define what the subject term will be, and the consequent will be defining what the predicate term will be, okay? Now, you can also have a case where you have the word or the phrase the only that's being used inside the statement itself. This is different from what we had before where only was in the beginning of the statement. So here we have the statement the only being used, and we have the example here. Android phones are the only phones imported by her company. Okay? Now in this case, the subject term will be what follows the only. Okay? So this is the subject term, not Android phones. Okay? The statement is actually about phones that are imported by her company, and those phones are Android phones. So this will be the predicate term. Okay? So given that this is the case, what we want to do is go ahead and add again the quantifier, which doesn't exist in this statement, and the copula. Notice that there's no standard copula being used, like are or are not. Okay? And when we do that, we would translate the statement into all phones imported by her company are Android phones. Okay? So we have, once again, the copula all, and then phones imported by her company, as we said, was the subject term, and Android phones would be the predicate term. Okay? And we're using the copula are. Another issue that we might have is with propositions requiring two translations. Now this happens when you have a statement like, everyone but gamblers sleep well at night. So you have, these are accepted propositions. In such a case, you have something like all except SRP or all but SRP. Here it's the same thing. Everyone but is the same thing as all but. In this case, what you want to do is change the statement into two statements, okay? Two standard form categorical statements. So the meaning of this one ordinary language statement is actually that it asserts two different standard form categorical statements at the same time. One statement that it asserts is that no gamblers are people who sleep well at night, okay? And the other statement that it also asserts is that all non-gamblers are people who sleep at night, okay? So what you want to do is, in order to change it into this kind of statement, into these two types of statement, you need to first identify the subject term. So here when you have everyone but gamblers, we're talking about gamblers as the subject term, and these gamblers sleeping well at night is the predicate term, okay? So here we have in the E-type statement, no gamblers, okay, as the subject term, and are people who sleep well at night. So we change that predicate term into a plural noun, okay? Then as the second statement that it asserts, what we do is we take the term complement of the first statement. So here we have gamblers as the term for the subject term, and we'll take the term complement of that subject term as the subject of the second statement. And we'll go from an E-type statement to an A-type statement. So we have all non-gamblers are people who sleep well at night, and we maintain the predicate terms, okay? Okay, so that concludes our first part of Lesson 3, translating basically ordinary language statements into standard form categorical statements. Now, when we did our translations, recall that we ended up with having some statements that were standard form statements which used term complements. So they had non in it as the term complement, okay? Now we're going to look at how to translate standard form categorical statements into different types of standard form categorical statements. And in doing so, we're going to work on getting rid of those non-terms, okay, or those term complements while maintaining the meaning, okay? So this will be done in part 2 of lesson 3.